So today I want to share a little story from a book that I absolutely love that's been wonderful. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass. It's by the Native American Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she's an ecologist, botanist, and writes so beautifully about kind of the Native American perspective, but also, I mean, there's so much overlap with Buddhism and the Dharma that each chapter I am just always inspired and invigorated by. But the one I want to share today, I think, is very important because even though it's a story from ancient times, it's incredibly relevant to today's times as well. So she says, the windigo is a legendary monster of the Anishinaabe people, the villain of a tale told on freezing nights in the North Woods. You can feel it lurking behind you, a being in the shape of an outsized man, 10 feet tall with frost-white hair hanging from its shaking body. With arms like tree trunks, feet as big as snowshoes, it travels easily through the blizzards of the hungry time, stalking us. The hideous stench of its carrion breath poisons the clean scent of snow as it pants behind us. Yellow fangs hang from its mouth that is raw where it has chewed off its lips from hunger. Most telling of all, its heart is made of ice. So stories about the windigo were told around campfires to scare little kids into behaving well. But she continues, the windigo is a human being who has become a cannibal monster. Its bite will transform victims into cannibals too. And this was also told during times in the winter time when they were facing possible starvation and had to be very careful about not being greedy. She said, it is said that the windigo will never enter the spirit world, but will suffer the eternal pain of need, its essence a hunger that will never be satiated. The more a windigo eats, the more ravenous it becomes. It shrieks with its craving, its mind a torture of unmet wants. Consumed by consumption, it lays waste to humankind. I was struck by this because it's so similar to the Buddhist view of the hungry ghosts. And it's a lesson that we can keep learning that it can cause a lot of destruction. She says, creation stories offer a glimpse into the worldview of people, of how they understand themselves, their place in the world, and the ideals to which they aspire. Likewise, the collective fears and deepest values of a people are also seen in the visage of the monsters they create. Born of our fears and our failings, windigo is the name for that within us which cares more for its own survival than for anything else. And so I think this was, again, Native American views were very much in line with Buddhism, that they really recognized that the self-centered thought is the biggest enemy. I mean, if you think back to kind of tribal times, people had to work together. They had to support each other. And if you had a self-centered attitude, you were a threat to the whole community and to the whole tribe. And so really recognizing that the self-centered thought is our biggest enemy is our biggest task. And it's also our hardest task because we're so deeply imbued in this view. But we can see again and again that when I'm focusing only on myself, that's what brings misery, and it does not bring happiness. So I know I have to stay alert in really clearly identifying this and catching it and challenging it and knowing that it's not to be trusted, and that really causes kind of all the root conflicts and suffering for myself and for others. I used to be a big fan of Joseph Campbell, who was a mythologist in the 60s and 70s. And because he studied world religions and world cultures and mythologies, and really identified a lot of kind of those key villains and heroes on a collective level that were shared throughout these different cultures, and talked about it in a way showing that we have so many more similar habits and ways of thinking than, even though there's different cultures, we're very much more similar than we think. And a lot of these kind of anthropomorphized characters are really helpful to identify and play with because they kind of show the extremes of our behavior, of how if we go out of alignment and emphasize these extreme behaviors, how detrimental they can be. And it's so helpful to recognize them, recognize the hazards, so that we can, really recognize it and not identify it with it and not get sucked into kind of that mentality of it. Because these mythical stories show us really what's going on inside of ourselves and the hazards of feeding that dark, greedy side that we all have. But we have to acknowledge that we have that inside of us and not just deny it. But we have to acknowledge it to then be able to understand it and tease it apart. As she says in the book, we have to see the dark, recognize its power, but then recognize intentionally not feed it. And that's what we have to really do is seeing the harm it causes and actively not engaging in it. Because I know for myself, if I just go on automatic pilot, my self-centered thought has a million excuses for being lazy and self-centered that I've followed for a really long time. So it takes a lot of really active, intentional awareness to be like, oh yeah, there you are again. You're not to be trusted. I've listened to you for so long and you've just caused me harm. But that key act of identifying it kind of instantly creates a little gap of like, okay, now I'm not going to be hooked and under the control of it. I love how our Buddhist practice of recognizing the advantages and disadvantages of things, because that helps in that awareness of, yes, I want to cultivate these good qualities and I don't want to feed these bad qualities. And also having that awareness that our actions matter, not just immediately, but also in the long term. And that also gives kind of a further impetus of really taking that responsibility of wanting to choose the wiser action and not just go on autopilot. So the root definition or the root word of windigo, I guess, means thinking of oneself, or also means fat excesses, which I thought was good because it's just fat excess, like just extra stuff that you don't need. And so that's what the self-centered thought is, and that's what happens when we are thinking of only of ourselves, that we don't, that's not a helpful way of seeing things. She says also in the book, a human whose selfishness has overpowered their self-control to the point that satisfaction is no longer possible. And that's that windigo mentality of just constant craving, so self-consumed and self-focused, also just completely consumed in its own beliefs, my own views, my own agendas, my own obsessions and addictions. And the more self-focused and completely narrow and tight that is, then that just it breeds so much misery that we're seeing in this world. And Native Americans lived on this land for thousands of years. Even just in this local area, they've been found to live at least 10,000 years ago. So they knew how to live on the land, and they knew how to live together. And so they knew the hazards of being greedy and taking too much, because if they killed too many animals one year, they would starve the next year. So they were very much intimately connected with the land and recognizing that how harmful greed could be. Sadly, I think in the world these days, because we spread out around the world, we don't feel those immediate effects so personally, but it's getting spread out on a global scale. And so we're now kind of experiencing them on a much more catastrophic level to everybody, as far as these hurricanes, the floods, wars, all of our troubles these days come back to greed. They can be traced back to that self-centered attitude and greed. I mean, all of our environmental damage and impacts come from just wanting to do my thing and not caring about the effects of it, not recognizing the impacts. She continues by saying, it's the windigo that tricks us into believing that belongings will fill our hunger when it is belonging that we crave. And we've kind of been conditioned in our society to think that the happiness comes from outside, and that it's the material things that will make us happy, but it's really not at all the truth. And what we're really wanting is that kind of sense of security, safety, and connection, and recognizing our shared beliefs and our shared values, things that connect people, not separate them. And when we're focused on material things, that kind of separates us. We're just looking, especially technology and material things, that's not really going to satisfy us. And so, let's see. One more section. She says, the fear in me is far greater than just acknowledging the windigo within. The fear for me is that the world has been turned inside out, the dark side made to seem light. Indulgent self-interest that our people once held to be monstrous is now celebrated as success. We are asked to admire what our people viewed as unforgivable. The consumption-driven mindset masquerades as quality of life, but eats us from within. It is as if we have been invited to a feast, but the table is laid up with foods that nourish only hollowness. The black hole of the stomach never fills. We have unleashed a monster. And it's not just within ourselves, but we're seeing it socially and politically and environmentally, that kind of our norms, what used to not be accepted as far as lying or criticizing people, those are just now sadly much more common in our world. And one of the great things of being at the Abbey is that we talk about recognizing this hole inside of us and actively working on transforming it. And I mean, this is one of the main reasons why I chose to ordain, which happens to be 4 years ago today, that in my outside world, I was chasing happiness, and even though I had started climbing the career ladder, it's like the higher I got on the career ladder, the more stressed I was, and so the more kind of emphasis it was to do fun things on the weekend. And so there was kind of this sense of urgency, like, okay, I got to go have fun, which just added to the stress. And so it was a really bad cycle of just like chasing the happiness outside of myself, and it was miserable. And so that was a huge factor of why I was like, wait, something's got to change. And so coming here, it's been a slow process to reprogram my mind from all the conditioning I've received in society that happiness is outside. But slowly I'm gaining more and more conviction that it is from inside, and developing these qualities inside and not outside. That's really the greatest joy. I think one of the greatest antidote that I've been working on that's been really helpful is gratitude and appreciation, and that helps bring a much more deeper sense of contentment. The other day I happened to go to Sandpoint to a cafe with some friends, and my eyes kind of were naturally looking around at these cute little nature-y things, trinkets and stuff, and I was like, oh, look at all those things, and it was just out of habit. I was like, oh, those are nice earrings and blah, 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 but then I caught myself, and I was able to be like, I don't need any of this. And it felt so good to recognize that, yeah, I mean, I'm so much more content with just having 2 sets of clothes, no hair, no car, and it's just so much easier and more fulfilling. The other day I was thinking about this concept of appreciation and really, appreciating things. But the thought popped in my head, like, can I have appreciation while also cultivating a sense of renunciation? And the conclusion I've came to is yes, if I'm aware of impermanence, that I can appreciate things, but know they're not going to last. Know I can't cling to them. Know that they're not going to bring happiness outside of myself. And it's that appreciation is also linked with recognizing dependent arising, that where so many things, so many factors come about to bring this thing that I'm enjoying right now. But knowing that they're going to change, and so there's no point in hanging on to them. So I can appreciate it, but not hang on to it. Yeah. And then another part of cultivating that sense of appreciation is that inner appreciation of recognizing how I really exist, of recognizing that I depend on many causes and conditions and exist dependently. And that I have this beautiful Buddha nature, and that it can be transformed into the mind of an awakened being. So it's a practice of acknowledging my good qualities and also accepting my imperfections. Again, held with that sense of impermanence, that none of it's set and solid, but if I have that intention to develop those qualities, then I can, and I can overcome those mistakes. And so it's appreciation that creates this sense of connection, that sense of belonging and interdependence that is much more satisfying. And it helps break down that view of a separate, solid self that has a hole in it. And it fills that hole with something much more wholesome. So let's keep working on nourishing this view that dispels that windigo, greedy, self-centered view, and work on recognizing and appreciating our interdependence, our shared humanity, and working on developing our greatest potential to become Buddhas.